Since the 1980s, the Mexican diaspora continues to be the largest immigrant group to enter the United States. As of 2013, there are approximately 11.6 million Mexican immigrants living in the U.S. This diaspora transpired through four main periods. It began prior to World War II, with agriculture workers being recruited by private labor contractors when companies were worried about labor shortages. The second wave came between 1942 through 1964 under the Bracero program, which brought more agricultural workers. The Bracero program was a series of mutual agreements between the U.S. and Mexico that would allow millions of Mexican men to enter the U.S. and work on short-term, primarily agricultural labor contracts. Similar to the Filipino migration as domestic helpers, Mexico also experienced a kind of gender diaspora. In Rosel Salazar Parena's article, Mothering from a Distance, Emotions, Gender, and Intergenerational Relations in Filipino Transnational Families, she says, in order to provide for their families, they must leave them behind in the Philippines and take advantage of the greater labor market opportunities in other countries of Asia, Europe, and the Americas. And this is just as what the men of the Bracero program did. They left their family in Mexico to find work in the U.S. After the Bracero program ended, the third largely unauthorized wave came in with the 1965 U.S. Immigration Act. This law eliminated the national origin quotas and instead imposed an annual cap on immigrant visas from the Eastern and Western hemispheres. The fourth wave was initiated by Immigration Reform Control Act of 1986. This act legalized close to 3 million unauthorized migrants, 2.3 million of those being Mexicans. This was in exchange for tougher border enforcement and penalties for U.S. companies that hired unauthorized workers. As a result, foreign immigrants began to settle permanently and brought their families over to the U.S. As mentioned, there were 11.6 million Mexican immigrants residing in the U.S. This accounts for 28% of all U.S. immigrants. They are mostly concentrated in the west and southwest region of the U.S. In 2013, the top 5 states with the largest proportion of Mexican immigrants were California with 37% of the total Mexican immigrant population, Texas with 22%, Illinois with 6%, Arizona with 4%, and Georgia with 2%. With the Mexican diaspora having strong history within the U.S. workforce, it's no surprise that 70% of Mexican immigrants aged 16 or older were in the 2013 workforce. This rate is higher than the 67% of all foreign-born immigrants aged 16 or older and the 63% of the U.S.-born population aged 16 or older. The kinds of occupations Mexican immigrants held were spread through 5 categories. The top category saw 31% of Mexican immigrants in a service occupation, followed by 25% in a natural resource, construction, or maintenance occupation. A close third was at 22% in production, transportation, or material moving occupation. At 12%, Mexican immigrants held a sales and office occupation. And at last, with 9%, Mexican immigrants held a management, business, science, or art occupation. As for education, it was reported that Mexican immigrants have a lower education attainment level compared to all foreign-born and native-born populations. In 2013, 6% of Mexican immigrants aged 25 or older had a bachelor's degree, compared to 28% of all foreign-born immigrants and 36% of those born in the U.S. To further understand the Mexican diaspora, we highlight the journey of the Mendoza family. The Mendoza family consists of father Leodegario, mother Ruth, and children Eden, Eliseth, Irene, Emmanuel, and Ilse. Their story began in Oaxaca, Mexico, a state in southern Mexico with a population of 3.8 million. In 1990, Leodegario and Ruth packed up their 4 kids and moved to Riverside, California. Leodegario's shop had not been doing well, it was not providing enough income to sustain their family, and decided it was best to relocate. Propelled by better work opportunities, the Mendozas chose to move to the U.S. for another reason besides economical. Emmanuel was born with a medical condition known as talipes equinovarus, more commonly referred to as clubfoot. The state of healthcare in Mexico drastically differs from the level of healthcare in the U.S. In Mexico, total expenditure on healthcare is only about 6% of the gross national product, compared to the U.S. where it is 15%. Mexico also does not have universal healthcare access for its population. The U.S. spends more than any other country because it pays higher prices and has greater volume of services, particularly high-tech services. At the time, Ruth had commonly been traveling to San Diego, California for doctor visits to help her youngest child at the time. She finally decided to make the move to receive better care for Emmanuel. The 2006 documentary Paper Dolls highlights the story of Filipino caregivers who leave their country and find work in Israel. These individuals migrated elsewhere in order to provide care to others. This is in parallel to the Mendoza family situation, who migrated elsewhere in order to find that care that could be provided to them. As the Mendoza family settled into their new life in the U.S., they never forgot where they came from. Spanish remains a household language. They also continue to practice the traditions they did when they lived in Mexico. One such example is La Noche de los Reyes Magos, or the Night of the Three Kings. On the night of January 5th, their family gathers to commemorate the day when the three wise men followed the star to Bethlehem. They share a large round cake pastry known as Rosca de Reyes and pair it with hot chocolate. The Rosca de Reyes contains a plastic baby in which a fun tradition follows. Whomever receives a slice of the Rosca de Reyes that contains the figure must host a celebration for Dia de la Candelaria on February 2nd. Though the Mendoza family enjoys life in the U.S., there are still some challenges they face as they live here. Irene, who is the third child, was 3 years old when she relocated with her family to California. She recalls becoming an American citizen when she was 17 years old. However, before then, she had goals to get a job but could not because of her legal status. On her identity, she says, "I always felt like an American citizen. I grew up here and it feels like home." Irene says she could relate to Stephanie from the short film Lost and Found. UCLA and DreamAct student Stephanie always saw herself as an American, despite her undocumented status. She noted that citizenship is more than rights and duties. Like Stephanie, Irene felt that she was culturally a citizen of the U.S. All in all, the United States continues to host the largest number of global diaspora members of any country in the world. Traditionally seen as a melting pot, the theory of assimilation has begun to be challenged more and more as we see different cultures permeate throughout the U.S. This gives way to the question, what does it mean to be American?